Okay, so let's get right into it. Imagine you've got this massive, impenetrable vault, and inside there's a priceless AI model. We're talking the result of $100 million and months of work. The AI's core programming, its weights, its parameters, it's all locked down. Super secure. Nobody gets in.
But here's the thing. For this AI to actually be useful, it needs a little window to the outside world. It's called an API, and it's how users ask it questions. It's also how the company makes its money. But that window, that's the model's single biggest weakness. Because an attacker doesn't need to break into the vault. They just need to walk up to the window and start politely asking questions. And by asking just the right questions, they can build a nearly perfect clone. So think about this. The cost for the company to build the AI, $100 million. The cost for an attacker to steal it, $60. So in this explainer, we're going to break down the absolutely shocking cost of this heist, the exact method they use, and why these attacks are basically invisible.
So let's start with the money, because the numbers here are just staggering. This isn't just some security gap, it's a massive chasm. We're calling it the asymmetric heist.
And just look at this chart. On the left, you've got that huge $100 million bar. That's the cost to train a major AI model. And on the right, that tiny little red sliver, that's the $60 it cost researchers at ETH Zurich to clone OpenAI's GP3.5 model. And this isn't some what-if scenario. They actually did it.
So what does that actually mean? Well, it means the attacker has a nearly 1.7 million to 1 cost advantage. Think about that. For every single dollar the company spends to build and defend their model, the attacker only needs to spend a tiny, tiny fraction of a penny to steal it. At that point, defense becomes economically impossible.
And this case study just lays it all out. The target was GPT 3.5 Turbo, a live model in production. The cost was just $60 in API credits. Over 3 days, they sent about 50,000 clever questions, and the result? They got a clone with 99% accuracy. But the most important number on this slide, the real kicker, is the last one: zero detection. OpenAI had absolutely no idea it was happening.
So the big question is how? How is that even possible? How does a $100 million asset just walk out the front door with no alarms going off? Well, it turns out the attacker doesn't need to pick a lock because the front door is already unlocked. Look, AI companies have the standard defenses in place. There's authentication, right? It makes sure you're a real user with a real credit card. There's rate limiting to stop you from spamming the system with millions of queries. And there's content filtering to block obviously bad requests. All of these systems work just fine. But the attacker doesn't trigger any of them. They create a paid account, so authentication is no problem. They stay under the query limits, so rate limiting doesn't see them. And their questions are totally harmless. Stuff like, what is 2 plus 2? So the content filters don't even blink. They look exactly like a normal, curious, paying customer. But it's not just the low cost that's shocking. It's the speed. By the 3-minute mark of this explainer, you'll understand exactly how 6 months of incredibly hard work can be stolen in just 3 days. Up top, you can see the 6-month slog it takes to train a model from scratch. You got data collection, the super expensive training part, and then validation. It's a marathon. But below that, you see the attacker's timeline. It's a 3-day sprint. A little recon, a day of generating questions, and one last day to train their clone. And that speed difference is absolutely critical. Because in the very rare cases an attack is discovered, it's usually because the researchers published a paper about it weeks after the fact. By then, the clone is already built, it's deployed, and it's totally out of the company's control. The theft is ancient history. All right, so what does this 3-day heist actually look like on the ground? Let's break down the 5-step plan. This isn't some messy brute force hack. It's clean, it's systematic, almost surgical. First up is reconnaissance. The attacker just kind of pokes around the API, seeing how it responds. They're looking for juicy, information-rich outputs, like logits, which are basically the raw probability scores the AI uses to decide on an answer. It's like seeing the AI's internal cheat sheet. Next is query generation, where they methodically ask thousands and thousands of different questions. Then collection. They just log every single question and every single answer. Fourth is training. They take all that data and feed it into their own, much smaller AI, teaching it to perfectly mimic the big one. And finally, deployment. The clone is done, and it can run on their own laptop completely off the grid. And because every single one of those steps looks like normal behavior, an incredible 98% of model extraction attacks go completely undetected. The attacker's activity is basically indistinguishable from a regular developer who's just building a new app.
So this brings us to the most disturbing part of this whole thing. This isn't a bug you can just patch. It's a perfect storm of vulnerabilities that are baked into the very structure of how these AI services have to work.
Let's just walk through the core issues. 1. The API has to be open for business or there's no product. 2. The model's answers have to be useful and detailed, which means they are constantly leaking information. 3. Current security systems are built to stop people from breaking in, not to analyze weird patterns and questions. And 4. That 1.7 million to 1 cost advantage, it just makes the attack too tempting to resist. And if that wasn't bad enough, 3 other things make it even worse. First, an attacker doesn't even need a perfect clone. A copy that's 95% as good is good enough for almost anything. Second, there's a huge legal gray area here. It's not even clear if this technically counts as theft. And finally, the theft is irreversible. Once that clone is out in the wild, you can't get it back. So, the big takeaway here is this paradox. The business model itself is the attack vector. The very thing that makes these AI models so valuable and revolutionary, their accessibility, is precisely what makes them so incredibly easy to steal. And as bad as all this sounds, the story gets even bigger. You see, this threat doesn't exist in a vacuum. It actually combines with other threats to create something much, much more dangerous. We've talked before about AI agent swarms, these armies of AIs that can coordinate attacks at machine speed. Now, today, we've covered model extraction, the ability to get a powerful AI brain for next to nothing. So what happens when you combine those two? What happens when you give those cheap, stolen AI brains the ability to work together in a swarm? You get a massive force multiplier, a coordinated, intelligent attack force that costs the attacker almost nothing to create. Which leaves us with one final, pretty chilling question. We know attackers can steal an AI's brain, and we know they can coordinate its actions. But what happens when they can also hijack its very perception of reality? We're going to explore that next time. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it.